Welcome to Flora and Friends, your botanical cup of tea, a podcast for plant lovers of any kind. We welcome guests to our botanical tea break to explore the history, science and meaning of plants for our lives. My name is Judith Lundberg-Felten. I'm a plant scientist, university researcher and founder of Flora-L Design, and I'm the hostess of your botanical cup of tea. Hello to all friends of the Flora and Friends podcast. I am delighted to have you join for our second episode with fungal photographer Stephen Axford and his partner and documentary filmmaker Catherine Marciniak. If you haven't listened to the first episode, which we released 2 weeks ago, I invite you to go there and to hear a little bit more about their story of how and why they got into fungal photography and filmmaking. Today we spent some time on the interview discussing about their traveling, their encounter of different cultures and of different people around the world that have a passion or a different relationship with fungi. So I hope you will enjoy this episode, and with this I say welcome again to Stephen and Catherine. You mentioned also that you have been to different places, and I have found on your website mushroom pictures from Australia, of course, your home country, but also from Chile, China, India, Nepal, Myanmar, Thailand, and New Zealand. So what brought you there?
Well, some of them were just holidays. So New Zealand's quite close to Australia, so that would have just been I went over there and photographing fungi because there's lots of fungi there. But some years ago now, I think 2014 was the first time that Professor Peter Mortimer, who's actually South African, but who is a professor at Kunming Institute of Botany in Yunnan in China. So he sent me an email prompted by his father, who'd seen my photographs, and his father suggested to him that he invite me out to help document their fungi field trips. So I got this email from China inviting me out there, thinking, I'd never had anything like that before. So anyway, bit the bullet, jumped on an aeroplane, arrived in Kunming, and since then we've been out there 4 times, I think. So we've been to Yunnan in China on 4 separate occasions. That also led to being invited to Northeast India twice, and once to Nepal, and we went to Myanmar and Thailand with the people from Kunming Institute of Botany.
They are involved in a group called Mountain Futures, which work in the Eastern Himalayas on conserving forests, but also looking at sustainable uses of fungi in those forests. So they're a really interesting group, and it has led to us documenting fungi in very, very remote forests in that region, which has been fantastic.
That must be quite an adventure to be there. Do you have a story to share from one of these trips?
Probably the person who made the most impact on us was a woman by the name of, well, it's not really her name. We were introduced to her as Kong, which means sister in Kasi. And this was in Meghalaya in northeastern India, just directly above Bangladesh. So you've got the flatlands of Bangladesh, and then Meghalaya, and Meghalaya, the mountains there are about 2,000-3,000 meters high. So not insignificant mountains, but nothing the foothills of the Himalayas, really. But the monsoon comes in across Bangladesh, hits these mountains, and drops an incredible amount of rain. So there's lots of fungi there. And we met Kong, who was one of the local people that was teed up to show us what their local fungi were like. And she was terrific. That she took us out there and she'd be pointing out, we'd ask her through by way of an interpreter what this fungi was, what this mushroom was, whether it was poisonous or not. And there was one yellow mushroom there, and we asked her if it was poisonous or not, and she said yes, it was poisonous. And we asked her, how did she know? And she said she knew because she ate it. And then described how she was sweating, and, you know, she speaks no English at all. And yet I had no problem at all understanding exactly what she meant from her body language and the description. And we put her, we've got her in the film Planet Fungi Northeast India. And we made this film, and then we went back to Meghalaya the next year and we showed her the footage, and she was absolutely over the moon. It was, you know, we had all of her family gathered around watching this, and she was just, it was one of the highlights of any trip.
And in fact, since then, she's become quite a hero in Meghalaya. You know, that she's been given awards. I mean, this is a woman who, in the story we tell, shows how she was a single mum. And one of the reasons that she experimented a lot with fungi in the forest was the only way she could feed her kids was to feed them from the forest. So she took a lot of risks. But now she's been celebrated as this woman who can teach people in her own state of India about fungi, but also, you know, perhaps start up an ecotourism. And so she's become quite a celebrity. And it's really, you know, it makes us feel good that we've made such a difference in her life.
Wonderful. And that must have been a real interesting encounter, and very culturally very interesting as well. And then you share this passion for fungi with a person from a completely different culture, and who has discovered fungi in a completely different way as well to herself.
Yeah, and also she's just such a character. She's so funny. She was a wonderful person to be around.
So you mentioned the film that you have released, and that's available actually for people to watch. And you have also had contributions to the BBC's Planet Earth movie. So I wonder how this has all happened, and who are the people watching your movies, and how did this happen that you made a contribution to the BBC film, but also then you have made your own movie now?
Well, the BBC film was initially they sent me an email because of my fungi photographs. I'd put a lot of photographs on the internet, some of which were luminous fungi. Now, they were looking for someone who knew where to find luminous fungi, so they sent me an email basically asking me where you could find it and everything. And I thought, I don't know whether I want to, you know, tell other people where you find it, and then they come and photograph it or film it, and they get all they make the profit out of it. So I didn't even reply to the email for 6 months, I don't think. And then I decided I would reply, and I'd taken some time lapse at this stage. So I replied and said, well, yeah, I can tell you about the luminous fungi. And are you interested in this time lapse? And they weren't particularly well constructed time lapse. Like, I hadn't learned, there's a lot of things you need to learn about time lapse to make it work properly. But they saw the time lapse and instantly sent an assistant producer out to have a look at what we were doing. And she went back to England and they provided a bit more equipment for me and basically said they'd buy the time lapse. So I did the luminous fungi and I did some stinkhorns and
some of our local fungi.
Yeah, so some of the really spectacular local fungi, and I think I ended up with 1.25 minutes on Planet Earth 2. And 1.25 minutes is actually quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. And I cried when I heard David Attenborough's voice behind these time lapses that some of which were done in our shower recess.
Yeah, this is...
So that was the start of it. And when you start off with your time lapse on Planet Earth 2, you really can't have a better platform. Mm. So it's gone on from there, and there's been 8 or 10 television documentaries, I think,
including Fantastic Fungi, which is screening on Netflix now.
Yeah, and an IMAX.
Yeah, we're collaborating on an IMAX film at the moment, which is due for release early next year, called Magical Forest: The Secret World of Fungi, which showcases Steve's time lapses I co-wrote, and also stars Merlin Sheldrake, who some people who are into fungi might know for his recent book, Entangled Life.
Mm-hmm. We have that on our reading list. I'm part of a book club with some other plant biologists, and we read books and then we record a podcast on the books. So that is our next one. We're going to get more deeper into the books about fungi now, because it has become actually pretty much of a hype with the fungi. I noticed that myself. There's many documentaries, many books, a lot of fascination around fungi. And because they are different as compared to plants, they are somewhere in the dark as well in the forest often. So it's a little bit magical.
Well, with the first time lapse that I did on Planet Earth 2, basically it was pretty pictures with a little bit of commentary around it, but essentially just great pictures. Now the fungi films tend to be looking more at what fungi is, that people want things showing mycelium growing, not just the fruiting bodies, the mushrooms. So everything's getting a little bit more in depth now. People are starting to understand a bit more about fungus.
Mm-hmm. I think there's been a really big interest too, because, cultivation of your own mushrooms has become quite an industry, even in Australia, where we're quite what we call mycophobic. There's the amount of mushroom species that we eat here is pretty small, but the cultivators have created an industry around people buying and growing their own. So that's created a big interest. Of course, there's a big interest in psilocybin mushrooms as well. But I do think also people are starting to get that this is a new frontier of scientific discovery. The people that we go out into the field with in Yunnan, they go out into the field all the time during mushroom season. They have PhD students out there, researchers out there, professors out there, and even still going back to places they've been to many, many times before, 1 in 7 species that they find is new to science. So it really is a very big area of scientific discovery. And I think that, that ignites people's imaginations.
You mentioned that from the first movies where it was more pretty pictures to now it's getting maybe going a bit deeper and also talking about mycelium. Do you have an impression that there's more science included in the documentary movies now as well? Or is it still mostly documentation of what there is, but also a bit more of why it is there and what it does?
There's more science now. There's been several films come out which are targeted at mushrooms. So it's not just, oh, this is also in the forest, isn't it pretty? Which essentially what Planet Earth 2 was saying. It's more than that, but the amount of time spent on fungus was little more than just the talking around the minute and a quarter of those time lapse.
It was about luminous fungus. It was about luminous fungus and the role that luminous fungus might have in the ecosystem in terms of the animals and insects there. So it was very specific to one type of fungus, whereas now we're finding that people are actually interested in fungi as an organism within the forest ecosystem.
Yeah, and the way it combines with other things, the symbiosis, that it's starting to be recognised that if you're interested in symbiosis, inevitably you fall across fungus at some stage because they're involved in so many symbiotic relationships.
And I think even there's a very known researcher, Suzanne Simard, and she had been featured in the New York Times as well with a large article about how forests are connected by mycelia underground. So even in written format, there has been more attention been paid to interactions of plants with fungi and the importance for the ecosystem. So it's great that that is also visible in the movies, and we are using that form of art to spread more knowledge about what there is out in nature. So you're making a very important contribution to education of people as well. Yes. Do you have a favorite fungus that you like to eat? Now that you said you come from Australia, that is rather mycophobic when it comes to eating fungi.
Well, we actually had a lot of fungi to eat in Yunnan in China. And probably one of our favourites is Tomatomyces, which you don't get in Australia, which grows a symbiotic relationship with termites. So the termites take the chewed up leaves and bits of rotting wood or whatever underground to their nest. They can't digest fungus. They can't digest the leaves. I mean, they can't digest cellulose. So they grow fungus underground, and then they eat part of the fungus and let the rest of the fungus develop. And when the nest dies, when the termites die off, then the fungus will fruit, and it pushes up from maybe a metre or so underground, these very hard pointed cap, and breaks out into the surface, and the fungus is beautiful to eat. So we've had some of that, and that's very nice. There's so many. They eat 900 different species of fungus in Yunnan, and some of them are hugely expensive, and we've had some very nice ones, some of which I couldn't name for you, I'm afraid.
I think that really is much more than we eat here in Sweden. There's lots of people being enthusiastic about picking mushrooms, but I think the most common are probably 5 species that are picked by most people because they are safe and easy to distinguish.
Yeah, I believe someone told me, a Norwegian, that there was a fungus that looked like an edible one that they were getting a lot of poisonings from in Norway now. I think perhaps because of climate change, the climate is a little bit different now, so this new mushroom is growing and it's quite poisonous. So it's always wise not to eat mushrooms you're not entirely familiar with.
Yeah, exactly.
And certainly a lot of our work in Asia is about helping people identify poisonous and edible mushrooms. So field guides have been made from Steve's photographs and from the videos that we do there. And when we were in Myanmar, one of the reasons, even though we were only there for 2 weeks, one of the main reasons they wanted us to go there was that there was an amanita that people were eating that was killing people, that was very similar looking to an amanita that might be regarded as edible. Mind you, Steve and I have a bit of a policy about not eating amanitas of any kind. But yeah, so, and we did find this amanita and it was a new species, but it was killing people. So yeah, people do need to be very careful.
Mm. And then it's especially important to document it so that people can distinguish it from others. I think having a book that tells one that this is what you can eat, but it resembles this other one, so then you know exactly what kind of signs or anatomical features to look out for to distinguish a poisonous one from an edible one. So, but that also asks for good enough pictures.
Yeah.
So I had one question, maybe I can go back to that. As you have documented mushrooms in so many different places in the world, in Asia and in Australia, have you noticed any fundamental difference? I think compared to Sweden, probably there's many more species and you have all these luminous fungi in Australia as well. And but what is your impression when it comes to like major differences between these two continents?
It's hard to really describe the differences. There's the fungus here and the fungus in South America seem to have similarities, like in Chile and Australia and New Zealand. The Southern Hemisphere continents, I guess, more closely related to Gondwanaland. The Northern Hemisphere fungus is a little different, but then there's crossover because there's strange crossovers. There's fungus that is common to Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and there's fungus that's common to Australia and South America. So I don't know that I can put my finger on it. There are differences. The species you see in Australia tend to be a little different from the species you see in Asia and South America, and certainly Sweden, though we haven't been fungi hunting in Sweden
yet.
So, yes, there is differences, and there are certainly differences the way people treat fungus, and there are differences. Tropical fungus is different from temperate fungus. But trying to put your finger on what the actual difference is between, say, Australia and the Eastern Himalayas, it's not all that easy.
So an example of that would be you'd say, okay, well, where we do document fungi in Asia, many of those areas are tropical. So you think, okay, or subtropical. So maybe there'd be similarities to our subtropics. But where we are, we have mostly above ground, we have mostly saprobes fruiting. We don't tend to have that many ectomycorrhizal fungi in our rainforests. That is, the fungus that lives in mutualistic relationship with the roots of trees. But where we go to in Asia in the subtropics, there's lots of ectomycorrhizal fungi. So that similarity doesn't exist. We see more similarity potentially between Tasmania and Chile and New Zealand, where you've got the Nothofagus forests. But then, of course, that will be, and they have an autumn fungi season similar to the Northern Hemisphere where you are, but the fungus between there and where you are is very different. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think it's very hard to come up with generalizations for fungi because we know so little about it still.
Mm-hmm. Do you have plans to coming to Europe and documenting some fungi here?
We'd love to. But there's a lot of, we've got an invitation to Sri Lanka, another one to China, Mexico, and potentially India and Nepal again. So, yeah, it's the art of the possible in the end.
We feel like we need another lifetime to fit everything in. We have a film half shot in Yunnan, so we must go back there and finish our Planet Fungi Yunnan, because that's going to be amazing. Much more science. Planet Fungi in Northeast India is very what we call ethnomycology, where we are with villagers a lot and learning a lot about the fungi in those forests from them and also what we observe. But the Planet Fungi Yunnan is much more based in the science, the scientists that we work with there. So really interesting new science about fungi will be revealed in that documentary. But then we also have this idea about doing a Planet Fungi, the grand tour. You know how in the 1900s, people used to do the grand tour? Well, we would like to do the grand fungi tour of Europe and meet up with all these fascinating people that we network with on Instagram and on YouTube and on our Facebook page. We talk to people all over the world every day. Mm-hmm. And, we definitely like to meet up with some of those people. So it is part of our plan. I just hope we don't run out of time.
Yeah, I think it's like fungi. They don't just connect trees in the forest, they also connect people around the globe. And that would be really, I think, amazing if you could have connecting the different parts of the world and the different fungi in the different parts of the world and what we know about them to give a global view of fungal diversity. And I'm so fascinated by evolution. Like, how did this all happen? Why did this become like this? So, yeah, amazing things to come from you. Of all these different fungi that you have photographed, do you have a favorite one?
Well, I do have a favorite, but if you ask me next week, it'll be another one. So it keeps changing. The fungus that I'm photographing at the moment might be my favorite. So I don't know.
What's the favorite at the moment?
At the moment, I probably don't have one. But overall, I guess if I had a favourite, there's a local mushroom which is really quite rare, which is a brilliant sky blue. And blue's an unusual colour for a fungus.
It's quite an unusual fungus.
Yeah, it's a truffle-like fungus, so it tends to be round, doesn't open up completely. Opens up partially, but it's actually a coprinus, so it's a Coprinopsis atrovirens.
And Steve discovered it here. It's never been seen here before. It's only ever been seen on Lord Howe Island and New Caledonia.
And it's actually green in where it was discovered. So there's this green fungus and we've got a blue version of that, which I think is actually nicer than the green version. But the same species.
The mycologist that we work with in Victoria says it's the most beautiful mushroom in Australia. And my favourite is another blue mushroom, actually, which is a Tasmanian species called Mycena interrupta, which has only recently been discovered it's only just recently been DNA tested, even though it's one of the oldest mushrooms in the Kew collection. So it was collected in the 1800s for Kew, but never DNA tested. And there's a very similar looking mushroom in New Zealand and also in Chile. And they've just DNA tested Mycena interrupta from specimens that I took, actually, and found that it's the same as the South American and New Zealand mushrooms. So there might be a little bit of renaming happening in the future when that paper comes out.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, it used to be the case that you used to be able to rely on the scientific names to never change, and the common names were, they'd be all over the place. But now the scientific names seem to change almost as often as the common names do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of DNA testing.
Yeah, people test the DNA and they find that something they've been calling one name is really another name entirely.
Yeah, and then they get renamed, and then it's really difficult to find it, even by Googling it, because things had a different name before. So I think there is maybe also some work to be done to make it searchable more easily.
Mm.
Yeah, there's one that's quite common around here that we used to know as Mycena viscidocruenta, but then they've renamed it now Cruentomycena viscidocruenta. So if you can get your mouth around that name, you're doing well.
Then you can find it. Do you have a favorite mushroom book? You were mentioning Entangled Life. Are there others?
There's the book that got me interested to start with was Fungi of Australia by Bruce Fuhrer, who I'm not sure that Bruce is still alive. He'd be very old if he wasn't. But he took beautiful photographs of mushrooms, and it's the first book I came across. And I guess it's one of my inspirations to getting into mushroom photography and really trying to take really nice pictures of mushrooms, because Bruce's book was filled with nice pictures of mushrooms. A lot of guidebooks, a lot of field guides. They're just pictures. They're nothing really inspiring, but Bruce's pictures were really well lit and really well set up. So that was probably my favourite book. But now I think Merlin's book, Entangled Life, is a good book.
I think what I love about Merlin's book is that it's probably one of the first that's gone into depth about the symbiotic relationships between fungi and so many other things, and lichen, and how fungi helped, create the world as we know it. And also philosophically, how fungi exists without us, beyond us, despite of us. and it will be here when we're long gone. And I like his take on nature and the role that fungi plays in it. It's a really interesting philosophical, artistic, and scientifically accurate exploration of fungi.
Mm. That is wonderful. That really wants me to read it. And as I said, it's on my list, but I haven't done it yet. So I'm looking forward to see this perspective. And I have always found like reading popular science books always provides a new perspective, because everybody noticed something different. And that I can also see from films, from documentaries, that everybody has a different view on the world and will see things that another person won't see. So that's a great resource actually to look and read and watch these resources and see what else you can discover in the world that you haven't noticed yet or you haven't put a focus on. So yes, is there anything else that you would like to share?
I don't think so. It's just that the world, well, the world in general is, never-ending interest. That we go out and, as Catherine said, we always find something new, even if it's just a new way of looking at something. But all the interactions, I remember when we discovered fungi gnats living underneath fungus, and it was with Mycena interrupta in Tasmania, and we saw these webs being spun underneath on a time lapse of Mycena interrupta. And we thought, that looks like a glowworm. So I researched it, and a glowworm, in fact, is a fungi gnat that has just changed its lifestyle, so it feeds primarily on insects, whereas a fungi gnat feeds primarily on fungus, and the ones that spin their webs under the caps feed on the spores. And they occasionally eat insects that get caught in their webs, gives them a bit of extra minerals or something. But unfortunately, the fungi gnat that we found wasn't luminous, because that really would have made a spectacular time lapse to have a luminous glowworm underneath the fungus.
But then, we ended up in China not long after recording that fungi gnat web being woven underneath the Mycena interrupta. And we went up to one of their research labs where they had a whole bunch of fungi growing in a soil bed, and they'd kept them a little bit more mature because they thought that we might be interested in filming or photographing them. And underneath all of these mushrooms, completely different species, were these webs that had been woven. And so we said to them, oh my God, we think that they're fungi gnat webs. And they went, no. And we went, I don't know about that. And so they got their fellow who was an expert in fungus and insects to come up, and sure enough, they had fungi gnats underneath all of these mushrooms. And so again, this whole new world opened up to us. So I guess the thing that we love to share is that, be curious. I mean, the world is such a fascinating place, and we just feel so grateful that fungi, that this organism has changed, enriched our lives. We get to be creative, we get to be inspired, and we get to be out in the forest. I mean, how can it get any better than that?
That was a lovely finishing word for this interview. Where can people find you and your films and your pictures?
Well, we tend to go under the brand of Planet Fungi, and if you Google Planet Fungi, you'll find us on Instagram under Planet Fungi. You'll find us on YouTube, where there's lots of free videos actually about some of the safaris we've done in China and Patagonia, and where else have we got? And lots of fungi finds in the forest. But if you want to see our fungi safari in the Himalayas, go to www.planetfungi.movie, and you can stream it directly from our website or from Google Play, iTunes and Amazon.
And just for the photographs, just search for Steve Axford, and that will come up with a SmugMug site. It's steveaxford.smugmug.com, and that has all my photographs on it. There's probably about 10,000, so it would take you a fair time to go through them all. I tried to catalogue them by species, and they're, to a certain extent I've succeeded, but there's still a lot of photographs that I've taken that aren't in the species list at all. So if you wanted to see the lot, you have to go to locations and look at Chile and Australia and so on. That I tend to take photographs and then I forget to catalogue them, or I honestly don't know what they are. So how do you put them by species if you don't know what the species is?
But the catalogue is an amazing resource, and, as time goes by, Steve will keep adding to that. And, I don't think I know of anywhere else on the net where you'd find that.
No, I don't. I think it's fairly unique.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Stephen, for being here today with me and opening the doors and our eyes to the world of fungi in many different places in the world.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting us.
I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and if you did so, please share it. And if you're listening from a platform where you can leave a review or ranking, I would be delighted to get a 5-star review from you. This will help the podcast to be found and make even more people aware of how wonderful nature around us is. If you would like to be updated on future episodes, subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or Google Podcast, or whatever your favorite podcast provider is. Or register for our newsletter at www.flora-l.com. Thank you and goodbye.